Brad Lockwood ran the Oakwood Heights HOA like a petty dictator. With his perfectly pressed polo shirts, immaculate clipboard, and perpetual sneer, Brad had a very simple philosophy for community management. My neighborhood, my rules. Everyone knew him as the guy who'd measure your grass with an actual ruler and leave a fine if it dared exceed regulation height. Garage doors had to be painted HOA beige. Holiday lights were subject to strict takedown dates. And woe to anyone caught with an unapproved garden gnome. For years, Brad ruled with an iron fist, and most residents begrudgingly fell in line. Reluctant compliance was the price of peace. But Brad's control wasn't just about the bylaws, it was also about power, and he enjoyed nothing more than wielding it over his neighbors, which is exactly why he'd taken an unhealthy interest in the one homeowner who hadn't shown the proper level of deference towards him since moving in 2 months ago. Sophia Black was a mystery. She'd purchased the sprawling corner lot at the end of Magnolia Lane, a property that had multiple upgrades, including a private gate and driveway that set her residence apart. It was clear from the outset that she was wealthier than most Oakwood Heights residents, but Sophia kept to herself. Her sleek black car came and went at odd hours, the gate's security camera quietly observing as she dealt with her own business. She didn't attend HOA meetings, didn't respond to warnings about community pride, and certainly didn't raise her hand to volunteer for any of Brad's endless subcommittees. To Brad, ignoring an HOA edict was essentially a declaration of war, and Sophia, with her cool confidence and unperturbed manner, seemed untouchable. Brad hated untouchable people. It's for the good of the neighborhood, Brad told himself one morning as he fiddled with the freshly made copy of Sophia's gate key. His plan had started innocuously enough. A locksmith who worked part-time in Oakwood Heights had complained about late payments for a gazebo repair project, and Brad had leveraged that little oversight into a favor. A quick adjustment to Sophia's gate and a duplicate key now meant Brad could enter her property whenever necessary for inspections. Necessary turned out to be immediately. Brad was dying to find out what Sophia was hiding. What kind of person built barriers between themselves and the community? What secrets would her home reveal? Brad waited until evening when he knew Sophia was running errands. Unbeknownst to him, her gate cameras silently recorded him as he slipped through her front gate, key in hand, with a smirk plastered across his face. He felt like a detective. No, more than that. A vigilante upholding the sacred HOA laws against rule breakers. What started as a general inspection quickly turned into him snooping. He wandered past her immaculate garden, glancing through perfectly clean windows into a beautifully decorated home. On the counter, he noticed stacks of papers and a sleek laptop. Fancy decor. Luxury hardwood flooring. Everything felt too calm, too controlled. He made his way inside, glancing at family photos on a mantelpiece and taking mental notes of any HOA infractions he could write up. But then, the sound of a door closing stopped him in his tracks. Brad spun around, his clipboard slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. Sophia stood framed in the doorway, her sleek black blazer immaculate, her arms crossed, and her piercing eyes pinning him to the spot. "Brad," she said smoothly, almost playfully, "what are you doing here?" There wasn't a single note of panic in her voice. "I was just conducting a routine inspection," Brad stammered, his voice rising an octave. He tried to adopt the righteous tone he used to scold people about Christmas lights. "Your property has been flagged for multiple non-compliance issues. You can't just flaunt the rules of the HOA without consequences." Sophia didn't move. She simply tilted her head, her measured silence stretching into an unbearable eternity. It was then that Brad noticed the glossy black folder in her hands, the embossed gold lettering reading Black & Associates Law Firm. The name felt heavy with implications, especially given the countless billboards he'd seen advertising murder defense and corporate takedowns, each one featuring Sophia's sharp gaze and the tagline, "The lawyers others fear." When her lips quirked into a deadly smile, Brad finally understood. He had just broken into the home of one of the country's most feared and formidable attorneys. "Oh, Brad," she said with an icy laugh, "you're going to regret this." The fallout was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, Brad was served with legal papers. Sophia had filed a lawsuit against him for trespassing, invasion of privacy, and misuse of HOA authority. The sheer length of the document was staggering. The case read like a thrilling novel, complete with timestamps from her gate camera, witness testimony from the locksmith she'd already coerced into confessing, and even a section on the various bylaws Brad himself had violated. To make matters worse, Sophia had CC'd the entire HOA board. "What were you thinking?" one of the board members railed at him during an emergency meeting. "She's got us all wrapped up in this now." Brad stammered excuses and attempted to spin the narrative in his favor, but the evidence was damning, and Sophia's reputation as a legal powerhouse meant she wasn't bluffing. The lawsuit became the talk of Oakwood Heights. Residents who had once cowered in fear of Brad began whispering to each other with glee. Some even began breaking small HOA rules just to see if he'd dare issue another warning. The final blow came at the next HOA meeting. Sophia showed up, dressed in her signature sharp black blazer, with a stack of paperwork in one hand and a lawyerly smirk firmly in place. When it was her turn to speak, she delivered a short but decisive statement. "After reviewing the extent of Mr. Lockwood's unlawful activities, I have no choice but to take this matter to its logical conclusion," Sophia said, her voice measured but cutting. "However, I am willing to negotiate. If Brad resigns immediately and publicly apologizes to every homeowner here, I will withdraw the lawsuit." The room erupted in murmurs, residents exchanging delighted glances. Brad, cornered and pale, shakily agreed to her terms. Brad's resignation was public and humiliating. Forced to stand in front of his neighbors as he apologized for his actions, he couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Sophia, standing at the back with her arms crossed, watched the proceedings with a calm satisfaction. Afterward, the HOA board quietly revised some of its bylaws to prevent future abuse of power. Residents began to feel a renewed sense of community, one free from oppressive rules and endless fines. Sophia, for her part, remained as private as ever. But when neighbors started knocking on her door to thank her for standing up to Brad, she graciously accepted with a sly smile and a polite, "Just doing what I do best." Months later, word spread that Brad had moved out of Oakwood Heights entirely. Rumor had it he'd taken a job managing a fast food restaurant, perhaps the only place left where no one cared about his clipboard. Meanwhile, Sophia continued to live quietly, her presence a calming but powerful reminder that sometimes the law has no need for gates or fences. It just needs the right person to wield it. And for the first time in decades, Oakwood Heights felt like home again. Life in Oakwood Heights settled into an unexpected calm following Brad's resignation, but the vacuum left by his absence didn't last long. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to appoint an interim president, and after much deliberation and several heated arguments, they selected Nancy Green. Nancy was Brad's total opposite. Where he was rigid and controlling, she was approachable and reasonable. She had lived in Oakwood Heights for 20 years, knew every neighbor by name, and grew the neighborhood's best tomatoes in her backyard. She ran on a simple platform of common sense and kindness, promising to make the HOA about helping residents rather than burdening them. Under Nancy's leadership, the HOA bylaws were quickly revised. Gone were the rules requiring a single, approved shade of beige for mailboxes. Annual inspections became optional and free. Fines were drastically reduced, and Nancy even organized events that genuinely brought the community together, like potlucks and movie nights in the park. For Sophia Black, this new approach was pleasantly surprising. She reserved her judgments at first, still wary from her collision with Brad's tyranny. But the day Nancy knocked on her door with a basket of fresh tomatoes and a genuine apology for the HOA's past behavior, Sophia felt something thaw. "Thanks, Nancy," Sophia said, accepting the basket with a polite smile. "I'll hold off on suing you. For now." Nancy laughed nervously, not entirely sure if that was a joke, and quickly left. While Oakwood Heights basked in its newfound harmony, Brad Lockwood had not gone quietly into obscurity. For months he stewed in his modest rental on the outskirts of town, nursing his bruised ego and ranting to anyone who would listen. Namely his cat, Mr. Whiskers, and the occasional unlucky telemarketer. But as time passed, his bitterness hardened into resolve. Oakwood Heights had wronged him, he decided. He wasn't a tyrant, he was a visionary. And if they couldn't appreciate his genius, maybe he could find a way to remind them of what they'd lost. Thus, Brad came up with a plan. He would petition to return to the HOA, not as its president, of course. He knew how that would go, but as a concerned resident willing to assist with compliance enforcement. He convinced himself that the neighborhood needed him, and that, perhaps, they would welcome his return with open arms. Brad typed up an official-looking proposal, complete with a bullet-pointed list of his qualifications and accomplishments, conveniently omitting his trespassing scandal. He printed it on expensive paper and hand-delivered it to Nancy during a community meeting. The room fell silent as she read aloud, "Proposal for the reinstatement of Brad S. Lockwood as compliance consultant." Sophia, seated at the back with her arms crossed, burst into laughter that echoed through the hall. Brad scowled but stepped forward confidently. "I think the community deserves my expertise," he said, ignoring the bewildered faces around him. Nancy, to her credit, maintained her composure. "Thank you for your, interest, Brad," she said diplomatically. "But I think Oakwood Heights is doing just fine without a compliance consultant. We'll give your proposal the attention it deserves." Brad's face turned an alarming shade of red as the room erupted into cheers and laughter. "This isn't the last you'll hear of me," he bellowed before storming out. Sophia leaned over to Nancy and quipped, "See, he can't even quit a room without drama." Although she tried to remain inconspicuous, Sophia couldn't avoid becoming a local celebrity after her showdown with Brad. Neighbors who once gave her a wide berth began stopping by to introduce themselves, usually bearing baked goods or bottles of wine to express their gratitude. "Thanks for sticking it to Brad," said Dave, a retiree from down the street, as he handed her a tin of cookies. "That guy was a menace." Sophia accepted the gift with a gracious nod. "I just did what any lawyer would do," she said, though the hint of a smile on her lips betrayed her enjoyment of the newfound admiration. Word spread quickly about Sophia's impressive legal skills, and soon her neighbors began seeking her help with everything from disputes over property lines to drafting airtight wills. Though she firmly refused to turn her home into a satellite law office, she did agree to offer occasional advice in exchange for favors, like dog-sitting or lawn care. Her reputation created an unexpected shift in how people approached her. Where once they whispered about the mysterious woman behind the gate, they now greeted her warmly at the grocery store or waved as she walked her dog. Even the kids in the neighborhood started referring to her as the lawyer lady, a nickname she secretly found endearing. Several months passed without incident, and just as the community began to believe that Brad might have quietly moved on, he returned with one last attempt to stir the pot. Under the cover of darkness, he snuck into Oakwood Heights and planted dozens of lawn signs around the neighborhood, declaring things like, "HOA anarchy ruins communities. Say no to non-compliance. Bring back real leadership." By sunrise, the signs were impossible to miss. Residents gathered in small groups, shaking their heads and rolling their eyes at Brad's tantrum. Sophia, meanwhile, pulled out her gate camera footage, which clearly showed Brad's midnight caper. Instead of confronting him directly, she forwarded the video to Nancy, along with a tongue-in-cheek suggestion to hold a neighborhood contest for the best Brad protest parody sign. The next day, the neighborhood was dotted with signs reading, "Say no to beige tyranny." Compliance consultant but still fancy Karen. We love Nancy, tomatoes, and freedom. Humiliated and unable to rally any support, Brad finally gave up. With Brad finally out of the picture, Oakwood Heights flourished under a new era of unity and cooperation. Sophia remained a beloved, if slightly intimidating figure. Her private gate now a humorous symbol of the line no one dared cross. The once oppressive rules were replaced with guidelines that encouraged creativity and individuality, while still maintaining the charm of the neighborhood. Potluck dinners became a regular tradition, complete with Sophia's sharp wit keeping conversations lively. And Brad? He moved to an apartment complex outside the city, where the only rules he could enforce were posted by a leasing office indifferent to his opinions. For Oakwood Heights, the air seemed lighter, the streets brighter, and the future filled with the laughter of neighbors finally free from the shadow of an overbearing clipboard. Sometimes Sophia would catch someone glancing at her a little too long or whispering, "Did you know she's a lawyer?" as she passed. She didn't mind. If her reputation was all it took to keep Oakwood Heights in line, so be it. Someone had to keep the peace, after all. And Sophia Black was more than equipped for the job. For a few blissful months, Oakwood Heights basked in its newfound harmony. The absence of Brad's tyrannical clipboard was like a weight lifted off everyone's shoulders. Neighbors chatted easily across fences, kids biked freely without fear of violating invisible noise ordinances, and the potluck dinners had become local legend. Sophia Black, the once reclusive lawyer, had settled into her role as the neighborhood's unofficial troubleshooter. Her sharp legal mind was something of a secret weapon. Though she preferred to stay in the background, life was peaceful, and for the first time, it seemed like Oakwood Heights might have found its groove. Then the developer showed up. Jason Reed arrived one sunny morning in a sleek grey Porsche, his perfectly tailored suit flashing in the sunlight. He was the kind of guy who exuded charm, all easy smiles and perfect haircuts, but who left you feeling like you should double-check your wallet after shaking his hand. Jason was a real estate developer with big plans, and unfortunately for the residents of Oakwood Heights, those plans involved turning their community into Oakwood Village, a upscale complex of towering condos, boutique shops, and artisanal coffee houses. The quaint charm of the neighborhood would be paved over, replaced with parking lots and high-rises. Nancy Green stood at the gates of the community center, arms crossed and jaw set, as Jason presented his proposal with a slick PowerPoint and an even slicker pitch. "This, folks, is progress," he declared, as slides of shiny storefronts and rooftop pools appeared behind him. "Property values will soar. Businesses will flourish. This development isn't just a project. It's a promise for a better tomorrow." The room was filled with a mix of gasps, whispers, and outraged murmurs. To put it simply, Jason continued with a flourish, "The land was purchased earlier this year, and I'm here to work with you all for a seamless transition into the future." That's when Sophia raised her hand, all calm composure and dangerous poise. "I'm sorry, Jason. Did you say the land was already purchased?" Jason's grin faltered for the briefest moment, but he recovered quickly. "Yes, the original deed holder must have forgotten to notify your residents. I assure you, everything was above board." Sophia's sharp gaze told him she doubted that very much. The news of Jason's plan spread fast, and the neighborhood quickly split into two camps. Some residents, tempted by the promise of skyrocketing property values, thought maybe the developer had a point. But the majority, led by Nancy, argued that Oakwood Heights' charm and close-knit community were worth protecting. When Jason sent surveyors into the neighborhood, Sophia wasted no time making her opinion clear. She marched right out in her signature black blazer, leaning casually against her gate as the surveyors fidgeted uncomfortably under her watch. "You're trespassing," she said flatly. The head surveyor stammered, We have permission from Mr. Reed to be here." Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Mr. Reed isn't a homeowner here, but I am. And I'll remind you, in case you've forgotten, that trespassing is a crime punishable by fines or imprisonment, depending on the circumstances." The team scrambled to pack up their equipment and left faster than they'd arrived. "What was that about?" asked Sophia's neighbor Lucy, who had been peering over the fence to watch the spectacle. "Leverage," Sophia replied with a small smirk. "They can't build what they can't measure." Jason wasn't about to give up so easily. Within days, residents began receiving chilly letters, threatening eminent domain lawsuits and insisting that the development was inevitable. To Jason's dismay, every resident who brought the letter to Sophia quickly received a counter-notice from her desk that made Jason's threats look amateur. But Jason wasn't the only one with tricks up his sleeve. Sophia began digging through every record available on the sale of the land. With the help of Nancy and a few tech-savvy neighbors, she uncovered something interesting. The property Jason had supposedly purchased was listed under multiple ownership groups, each tied to legal loopholes and unclear titles. "This," Sophia murmured to herself as she stared at a scanned deed on her laptop, "is going to be fun." When Jason called a town hall meeting to formally present his proposal, Sophia made her move. The community center was packed, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder as Jason strutted onto the stage like a conquering hero. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice dripping with confidence. A large slide behind him showed Oakwood Village, in bold, modern fonts. "I know change can be scary, but trust me when I say this change is for the better. I've already secured rights to the land, and construction is set to begin within the year." "Actually," Sophia said, standing from her seat at the back of the room, "that's not true." Jason froze, every eye now on Sophia as she walked toward the stage with a stack of documents in hand. "You see," she continued, "my team and I have been reviewing the ownership records for the property in question. And as it turns out, your purchase was invalid. The title you're holding is clouded by at least 3 competing claims, some of which predate the previous owner altogether. Long story short, you don't own the land." A shocked murmur spread through the crowd as Jason's confident grin finally cracked. That can't be right," he sputtered. "Oh, it is," Sophia replied, her voice sharper than a scalpel. "And if you want to challenge me on this, I'd be happy to take it to court. But I should warn you, I don't lose." For the first time, Jason Reed was utterly speechless. The fallout from Sophia's reveal was immediate. Jason's development plans collapsed under the weight of legal complications, and his slick charm couldn't save him. Within weeks, he quietly pulled out of Oakwood Heights, leaving behind nothing but a handful of poorly designed posters and his tarnished reputation. The neighborhood erupted into celebration, declaring Sophia their hero once again. Nancy organized a block party in her honor, complete with a cake that read, "Sophia saves the Heights." For Sophia, it was just another case solved. But as she watched her neighbors laughing and dancing under string lights, she felt a warmth she hadn't expected. Oakwood Heights wasn't just a place she lived anymore. It was home. And as far as she was concerned, no developer, clipboard-wielding tyrant, or cheap coffee chain would change that. Months later, life in Oakwood Heights had settled into a pleasant normalcy. With Jason Reed gone and no new crises looming, the neighborhood flourished under Nancy's thoughtful leadership. The potlucks grew cheerier, the block parties livelier, and even the most private residents found themselves making new friends. For Sophia Black, the lawyer who once preferred solitude behind her gate, it was a welcome change. But peace, as they say, has a habit of being short-lived. One late spring morning, a notice was posted on the community center bulletin board that sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. A gas company, backed by a mysterious corporate entity, had announced its intent to build a pipeline directly through Oakwood Heights' private greenbelt. The greenbelt, a lush space with walking trails and playgrounds, was the heart of the community, and the thought of losing it was unthinkable. At a hastily arranged emergency meeting, tempers flared, tears were shed, and panic reigned supreme. "They can't do this to us," one neighbor shouted. "It's our land," cried another. "They'll destroy everything," Nancy said gravely, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the news. Sophia sat quietly in the back, her arms crossed and her sharp eyes scanning the documents Nancy had passed around. When the room fell silent, she finally spoke. "They made one mistake," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "They assumed we wouldn't fight back." Sophia dove into action like a general preparing for war. Using every resource at her disposal, she mobilized the community. Neighborhood kids became her smallest but most determined allies, organizing letter-writing campaigns and even filming a heartfelt video about the importance of the Greenbelt. Retirees offered their time to canvass local officials, rallying their support against the pipeline. Sophia worked late into the night, poring over legal statutes, environmental regulations, and zoning laws. It wasn't just about stopping the pipeline, it was about protecting what Oakwood Heights had become. The gas company's lawyers fired back with brash confidence, dismissing the neighborhood's complaints as insignificant. But they hadn't counted on Sophia Black. The final battle took place in a packed courtroom. Neighbors filled the gallery, dressed in matching green T-shirts that read, "Save Our Greenbelt." At the center of it all was Sophia, clad in her trademark black blazer and armed with a binder full of ironclad arguments. The gas company's lead lawyer was a smug man named Joseph Grant, who dismissed Sophia with a patronizing smirk. "Ms. Black, with all due respect, I don't think you understand the scope of this project. It's all very standard procedure." Sophia smiled, the kind of smile that sent chills down her neighbors' spines, in a good way. "Mr. Grant, with all due respect," she replied, "I don't think you understand the scope of my preparation." Over the next 3 hours, Sophia demolished every point the gas company had prepared. She revealed flaws in their environmental impact report, exposed shady financial dealings tied to their parent company, and even presented an obscure local law that effectively nullified their claim to the land. By the time she was finished, Joseph Grant's smirk had long since vanished. The judge, clearly impressed, ruled in favor of Oakwood Heights, issuing a permanent injunction against the pipeline project. The gallery erupted, neighbors cheering and hugging as Sophia stood quietly at the front, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. The victory was celebrated with the biggest block party Oakwood Heights had ever seen. String lights crisscrossed the greenbelt, tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, and laughter echoed long into the night. Nancy raised a toast to Sophia, her voice trembling with emotion. "To the woman who reminded us that a great community isn't about rules or houses or land. It's about people. And there's no one who fights for people like Sophia Black." The crowd erupted into cheers, and for once, Sophia felt no desire to hide behind her gate. As the years passed, Oakwood Heights became known as a rare gem of a neighborhood, a place where individuality and community thrived side by side. New residents were told the legend of the infamous HOA boss, the slick developer, the pipeline battle, and, of course, the woman who fought them all. Sophia, true to her nature, remained humble about her role. She still gave sharp but kind advice to her neighbors and maintained a watchful eye on anything threatening the harmony of the community. One day, as she watered the hydrangeas in her front yard, a new family walked by, their little boy staring at her with wide eyes. Are you the Sophia Black? He asked hesitantly. Sophia crouched down so they were eye level. A warm